Ashes of Creation showcased basic weapon attack combos in today's live stream. I'm going to get into some of the little details that I spotted about this update and give my thoughts. I'm going to focus almost exclusively on the combat portion of today's update, since combat is something I have over an hour of videos on this channel in the last few weeks. It's something I am certainly passionate about. First, towards the end of the combat showcase, we had confirmation that in the last live stream, the skills we saw were from the assassin or the rogue primary and secondary combination, and in this stream we saw the weapon master or the fighter combination. We saw 2, possibly 3 weapon master skills, a whirlwind attack, a hammer slam ability, and a dash, although this could be a universal dodge ability with a new animation. All of these abilities were the same no matter whether Steven was using the greatsword or the dual daggers, which is something we knew was the design goal going in. The devs stated they want to find the right balance between player agency, weight, and impact. Now, the way I view these terms is agency is player movement, weight is a player being to some extent affected differently by swinging a huge greatsword versus swinging the much smaller daggers, and impact being the effects the weapons have when they land. To find the balance between player agency and weight, they are incorporating a hybrid approach to the split body movement we saw at the end of Alpha 1 and the root motion we saw at the beginning of Alpha 1. So on the greatsword, the player will have a bit less player agency in order to give bigger weight to the swinging of this giant weapon. To me, this is a fair trade-off, as the attack radius of the greatsword is much larger than the daggers. It is not fully root motion, as the player will still respond to WASD movement during the attack, just less so than the daggers. The daggers seem to allow much more movement during the attacks than the greatsword did. Again, I feel this is a healthy trade-off, a give and take relationship. We saw a block on both weapons, which means Intrepid is going to experiment with a universal block skill on all weapons. This is something they had been considering, and it looks like they will be testing it. Now, as for the effect this block had on the greatsword, it seemed to roughly reduce incoming damage by 50%. I didn't catch a block with the daggers to see the damage reduction, but my guess is the damage reduction is probably different. I would suspect different weapons will have different block ratings, with the shield being the highest. What I don't know and would love to know is whether this block is restricted in any way via a resource or a cooldown. Steven, of course, was in God mode again, it appeared, as it seemed he had the ability to spam the block and the dodge or dash ability he was using. We did see the weapon combos. The greatsword combos seem very similar to the combo we saw in Alpha 1 on the greatsword in terms of animations and damage. It was a 3-strike combo with the first and second attack doing about the same amount of damage, and the third attack being roughly double the damage. The damage numbers seem to be about 330, 660 on the great sword chain per target hit. The chain was much slower speed to finish than the dagger chain, as you would expect to see. The whole chain for the great sword seemed to take approximately 2 seconds. They also had different animations for each attack in the chain, and the animation and attack radius were different based on player movement. The animations for the chain on the greatsword started with an overhead attack, then a left to right attack, and the final attack is a bigger right to left attack. I couldn't really notice a difference in the animation combo for the greatsword based on player movement, but it was very noticeable on the double daggers. So on the double daggers, when moving forward or strafing, the attack chain was an attack with the left dagger, then an attack with the right dagger, then an attack with both daggers in a wide arc in front of the player. When backpedaling, the chain switched to a left attack, right attack, and then a big overhead forward attack. The damage of the chain was roughly 130, 160, but again, the chain was much faster than the greatsword, and the whole chain finished in about 1 second. So just some very early theory crafting. The total single target damage per second of the greatsword is about 660. The total single target damage of the dual daggers is about 420. With the added bonus of the wider attack radius of the greatsword, the extra mobility on the dual daggers is not enough of a trade-off with the reduced damage. I would like to see the single target damage on the dual daggers be a bit higher to balance out the smaller attack radius and to more closely fit what daggers tend to be in fantasy RPGs. High single target DPS weapons, but not great for AoE. I realize that these numbers are all likely placeholder, and it is very possible that the gear Steven had on was more stats that benefited benefit the greatsword instead of the dagger. Also, more thoughts on the weapon chains. I think overall the increased damage and bigger attack radiuses on the third attack is great, but I'd like to see a bit more added to this. They talked a bit about class kit synergies, with an example being killing a mob with one ability resets the cooldown of another ability. I think some integration of the weapon combos into the synergies could be interesting. It could be as simple as the mace giving a small AoE heal to allies on the final attack chain, or it could get more complex and tie it into the class kit a bit and proc a certain effect on some abilities. I know Intrepid wants to keep weapon skills separate from class kits, and weapons work the same way on each class, so it might not fit into their design philosophy to get too in depth with the class kit and the weapon combo systems becoming intertwined too much, but it is a thought. Intrepid, again in this live stream, hits some of the little details out of the park to get the full holy trinity of player agency, weight, and impact in combat. It takes a lot of little elements and details all working together. Especially on the impact part, that is where the small things start to matter. The sounds and animations, I think for the most part, were well executed to give that feel of impact. The little touch that I think is probably not seen in many MMOs is the animations when the weapons came into contact with the environment. They also implemented some camera shake and motion blur effects that were pretty well done. The camera shake was very small, as it needs to be, but it does give a little bit extra to the impact. A small criticism I do have of the animations is I think overall they could stand to be tuned down just a little bit, and I think the weapon attacks as a whole could stand to be slowed down just a bit. 3 attacks in 1 second by the daggers is pretty fast. Also, a very small thing, but the new reticle seems to be a step back. It is barely noticeable on the screen, and now it is just a small dot. This is an easy thing to fix, so it's not a big deal in any way, but hopefully they have a lot of different options for the reticle. And of course, as I have said before, I would prefer ground targeting instead, but so far it seems they are not going that route. Overall, I do think Intrepid is on the right path with combat, but I will also say this was the easiest part of combat to make look good, and it is a very small part of combat. There is still a long ways to go before I personally will be convinced that Ashe's combat is on the right track. There are still several unaddressed issues that I personally have, as I noted in my recent video, the pros and cons of the Ashes of Creation combat design vision, which is an attempt to push Ashes closer to my perfect combat system outlined in my series where I designed my own fictional MMO. The part of combat they showcased today was not necessarily that much different or better than other action MMOs in the past. The animations and little details like the environmental effects might be a little different, but other MMOs have done this part well before. To me, is very good and is probably on par with BDO or Guild Wars 2 in terms of the melee action combat. It has the potential to be the best ever, but we have so much more we need to see. And the channel I thought was getting some more traction, but my latest video got slammed by the algorithm again, so let's see how this one does, I guess. I want to end with a small little nugget from Steven towards the end of this combat showcase, again hinting that Alpha 2 might be closer than we all think. With that, I'll see you guys in the next video.
And remember, this is a work in progress. This is something that we are still expanding upon, something that we are still improving. It is never truly finished, but of course, it is getting close to Alpha 2 ready.